Elektra crawled to Matt Murdock's apartment bleeding to death with her own sai sticking out of her chest. Bullseye killed her with her own weapon, and somehow, that still wasn't the worst thing a Daredevil villain ever did. Because years later, another man destroyed Matt Murdock's life without throwing a single punch. No rooftop fight, no costume, no assassin, just chemistry. A lawyer named Larry Cranston secretly poisoned Matt's wife, Mila Donovan, with a fear toxin so powerful it permanently shattered her mind. She became terrified of everything, everyone, even herself. During one of those episodes, she accidentally killed a man. And she never psychologically recovered. That's the thing about Daredevil villains people miss. Spider-Man fights supervillains. The Avengers fight invasions. But Daredevil fights people who know exactly where to cut. Not the body, the soul. And the deeper you go into Hell's Kitchen, the less this becomes a superhero story. And the more it starts feeling like a psychological horror story wearing a Marvel logo. Because every Daredevil villain is trying to prove Matt Murdock wrong. Wrong about justice. Wrong about morality. Wrong about hope. And level by level, they get closer to succeeding. Hell's Kitchen doesn't import monsters. It grows them. That's the first thing you have to understand about Daredevil's villains. Most superhero cities get attacked from the outside. Aliens, mad scientists, ancient gods. Hell's Kitchen creates its own violence locally. Street by street, apartment by apartment, bad system by bad system. And by the time Matt Murdock puts on the mask, the city has already been manufacturing predators for decades. That starts at level 1. The predators. Guys like Turk Barrett. And honestly, Turk matters more than people think. Not because he's powerful. He isn't. Not because he's smart. Matt has beaten him, arrested him, and terrified him more times than anyone can count. But Turk always comes back, selling guns, running errands, moving product, working for whoever currently owns the block. Because the real problem isn't Turk Barrett. It's that Hell's Kitchen keeps producing men exactly like him. That's what makes Daredevil different from Batman. Batman believes Gotham can still be cleaned up. Daredevil lives in a neighborhood where the system already failed a long time ago. Turk is what grows afterward. And then there's Bushwacker, which is where this stops being petty criminal territory. Bushwacker was a priest once, a real one, until his community got destroyed by drugs and violence and grief, and something inside him snapped hard enough that he decided God wanted him to start killing mutants. So he replaced his own arms with cybernetic weapons, gun arms, flamethrowers. Military hardware fused directly into his body. That's the pattern starting to emerge here. Hell's Kitchen doesn't just break criminals. Sometimes it breaks believers. But level 1 villains are still mostly random. Level 2 is where it becomes personal. This is where the hunters appear. And Muse might genuinely be one of the creepiest villains Marvel has made in years. Because Muse doesn't rob banks. He stages scenes. Murals made from corpses. Body parts arranged like gallery exhibits. Crime scenes designed specifically for Daredevil to discover. And then Marvel added the detail that makes him terrifying. Matt can't properly perceive him. Muse absorbs surrounding sound, scent, heat, all the sensory information Matt's radar sense depends on. So when Matt looks at him, there's just nothing there. A human-shaped absence. A hole in reality where a person should be. And Muse understands exactly how psychologically devastating that is for Matt. He even gouged out the eyes of Blindspot, one of Matt's proteges, as an artistic statement. That's what separates hunters from predators. Predators commit crimes. Hunters study you first. And then there's Larry Cranston, Mr. Fear, which honestly may be the most disturbing villain on this list because of how ordinary he is. Same law school as Matt, same education, same legal system. He just reached a different conclusion about what power is for. Cranston realized something terrifying. You don't need to physically hurt Matt Murdock to destroy him. You just need to poison the people he loves. So he slipped Mila Donovan a fear toxin slowly, carefully, quietly, until her own mind turned against her. She accidentally killed someone during a psychotic panic episode, and Matt couldn't save her. That's the moment Daredevil villains stop feeling like comic book villains. Because Bullseye kills people, Mr. Fear destroys reality inside someone's head, and Matt Murdock, a man who built his entire identity around protecting vulnerable people, had to watch the person he loved psychologically disappear while still alive. That's not supervillainy anymore. That's psychological surgery. And this is where the hierarchy starts getting dangerous. Because up to this point, the villains are still individuals. At the next level, they become weapons. This is where Daredevil's villains stop feeling human. Not because they lose emotion, because they become singular, focused, refined, weaponized around one idea. And nobody represents that better than Bullseye. Bullseye isn't terrifying because he's strong. He's terrifying because nothing about him is accidental. The man can kill you with a paperclip, a toothpick, a playing card. He once spit a tooth hard enough to kill someone. That sounds ridiculous until you realize what he actually represents. Perfect violence. No hesitation. No guilt. No conflict. Bullseye doesn't hate Matt Murdock the way Joker hates Batman. It's worse than that. He thinks Matt's morality is pathetic. That all the restraint, all the mercy, all the Catholic guilt is weakness pretending to be virtue. And every time Bullseye murders someone Matt loves, he's trying to prove a point. Not, you failed, but you were wrong. Elektra, Karen Page. The pattern matters. Bullseye keeps targeting the people closest to Matt because he wants Matt emotionally isolated, broken enough to finally admit the truth, that morality gets people killed. And the horrifying part? Sometimes Bullseye almost wins that argument, especially during Shadowland. Because eventually, Matt snaps hard enough to kill him. Not accidentally, not indirectly. Matt drives aside directly through Bullseye's chest, which means the line finally broke. And once Daredevil crosses that line, the rest of the hierarchy gets much darker. Because level 4 villains aren't just killers anymore, they're systems. This is where Daredevil stops fighting criminals and starts fighting structures powerful enough to reshape reality around him. The Owl is one of the earliest examples. People underestimate him because he isn't flashy, but Leland Owlsley represents something important: organized corruption, money laundering, political influence, infrastructure-level crime. The Owl doesn't need to beat Daredevil physically because he profits from the city staying sick. And then the Hand takes that idea and turns it into a religion. The Hand isn't a gang, it's an infection. An ancient death cult built around resurrection, assassination, and control through spiritual corruption. And this is where Matt's life gets truly dangerous, because the Hand understands something nobody else fully does. Daredevil is already psychologically vulnerable. Catholic guilt, self-punishment, obsession, martyrdom. Matt Murdock already thinks suffering gives life meaning. The Hand just pushes that belief further, until eventually, Matt becomes the leader of the Hand himself. That's the terrifying progression here. At level 1, villains attack Matt physically. At level 2, they attack his relationships. At level 3, they attack his morality. At level 4, they attack his identity. And then we reach Purple Man, Zebediah Killgrave. Honestly, one of the most disturbing villains Marvel has ever created. Because Purple Man removes the final defense every human being relies on: choice. His pheromones override free will completely. You obey him because your brain physically cannot resist. And for a character like Matt Murdock, a man obsessed with moral responsibility and personal choice, Killgrave represents existential horror, because what happens to guilt, or justice, or sin, if free will disappears? That's the question Killgrave forces into the story, and Daredevil never gets a comfortable answer, because every villain at this level is trying to prove the same thing: that human beings are far easier to control than they want to believe. And the worst part? They're getting closer to being right. At some point, Daredevil stops fighting villains and starts fighting gravity. That's what level 5 feels like. These are the people who pull entire cities into orbit around themselves. And nobody embodies that better than Wilson Fisk, the Kingpin. Here's the mistake people make with Fisk. They think his power comes from money. It doesn't. It comes from discipline. Wilson Fisk is what happens when rage becomes organized. The man rebuilt himself into infrastructure. Crime bosses fear him. Politicians depend on him. Cops work for him. Judges bend around him. And physically, he's horrifying. Spider-Man once grabbed Fisk thinking he was just a fat mobster, and realized too late that almost all of Fisk's body mass is muscle. This is a man who has ripped car doors off hinges with his bare hands, crushed skulls against walls, beaten enhanced people unconscious. But honestly, that's still not the scary part. The scary part is patience. Fisk can lose a fight and still win the city. That's why he works so well against Matt Murdock specifically. Because Matt believes justice should be personal, human, moral. Fisk believes morality is just another weakness ambitious people exploit. And over time, he starts proving it, especially once he becomes Mayor Fisk. Because now, the crime boss doesn't need shadows anymore. The system itself belongs to him. Vigilantes become illegal. Heroes become hunted. Law enforcement becomes weaponized. Matt Murdock, the lawyer who became Daredevil to defend Hell's Kitchen, looks up one day and realizes the kitchen itself has turned against him. That's what makes Fisk terrifying. He doesn't beat Matt physically. He exhausts him spiritually. But even Fisk still operates inside human systems. Level 6 is where the story becomes something darker. The Devils. This is where morality itself starts collapsing. And honestly, Shadowland is the breaking point. Because this is the storyline where Daredevil finally becomes the thing he spent his entire life fighting. After killing Bullseye, Matt takes control of the Hand. At first, it almost sounds rational. Use the enemy's weapon against them. Control the violence. Rebuild the city through force. And for a little while, it almost works, which is the scariest part. Because Matt starts believing he can control corruption without becoming corrupted himself. That never ends well in Marvel or real life. The Beast, the ancient demonic force connected to the Hand, starts feeding on everything Matt already carries inside himself. Guilt, rage, self-hatred, martyrdom, and slowly, Daredevil changes. More brutal, more paranoid, more authoritarian. Children in Hell's Kitchen become more afraid of Daredevil than the criminals he used to stop. Think about how horrifying that is. Matt Murdock, the blind kid who became a hero because he believes suffering should mean something, becomes the source of fear in his own neighborhood. That's the real function of the Beast, not power, revelation. It exposes what was already there. And suddenly, every villain before this starts making terrible sense. Bullseye wanted Matt isolated. Mr. Fear wanted him hopeless. The Hand wanted him obedient. The Beast wanted him honest. Because the deeper Matt falls into Shadowland, the more the story starts asking a terrifying question. What if Daredevil was never fighting the darkness? What if he was only delaying it? And level 7 is where that question finally gets answered. This is the level where Daredevil finally loses the argument. Not the fight, the argument. Because level 7 villains don't just overpower Matt Murdock. They prove something. That suffering does not automatically make people better. That morality does not always win. That guilt can become addiction. That hope can collapse under enough pressure. And honestly, the most terrifying part is that Daredevil's greatest enemy at this level isn't Bullseye, or Fisk, or even the Beast. It's the version of Matt Murdock that starts agreeing with them. That's why Mayor Fisk matters so much. Because Fisk finally achieves what every Daredevil villain before him was trying to build toward: legitimacy. The Kingpin becomes the law, and suddenly, Matt's entire worldview starts breaking apart. Think about it. Matt became Daredevil because he believed the legal system failed vulnerable people, so he created a second identity to protect them. But now, the criminal system and the legal system have merged together completely. There's nowhere left to stand. And Fisk understands something brutal about Matt that most villains never fully grasp. Matt Murdock needs to believe suffering has meaning, so Fisk attacks meaning itself. He turns heroism into criminality, turns the public against vigilantes, turns law into a weapon, turns morality into exhaustion. And eventually, Matt starts wondering if fighting actually changes anything at all. That's the real endgame, not death, hopelessness. Because hopeless people stop resisting. And then there's the final escalation. The Beast. Not just the creature. The idea behind it, the Beast represents the terrifying possibility that Matt was always vulnerable to this transformation. That underneath the Catholic guilt, the martyr complex, the obsession with punishment, there was always a part of Daredevil capable of becoming authoritarian, capable of becoming violent, controlling, cruel. And once Matt fully merges with the Beast during Shadowland, the hierarchy finally reveals what it was building toward the entire time. Not stronger villains. A mirror. Every level of this descent stripped away another illusion. Predator showed Matt the city creates endless violence. Hunter showed him love can become vulnerability. Weapons showed morality can be exploited. Systems showed corruption can become structural. King showed power can become legitimate. Devil showed righteousness can become tyranny. And inevitability? Inevitability shows that if you push a human being hard enough for long enough, eventually they stop asking, "How do I save this city?" and start asking, "How do I control it?" That's the tragedy of Daredevil. Not that Matt Murdock suffers, it's that suffering slowly starts changing what he believes. And that is why Daredevil's villains are so different from almost every other Marvel villain. Because Spider-Man villains usually attack Peter Parker's life, Daredevil villains attack Matt Murdock's philosophy. Every single one of them is trying to prove him wrong about humanity, wrong about justice, wrong about redemption, wrong about hope. And the horrifying part? Sometimes they almost succeed. If this changed how you see Daredevil's villains, subscribe. Because next time, we're going deeper into Marvel's psychological horror stories. The characters, powers, and philosophies that stop feeling like superhero fiction and start feeling uncomfortably human.